The Apostle Paul wrote, "Flee fornication. Every sin that a man doeth is without the body, but he that committeth fornication sinneth against his own body." In today's sexually permissive culture, it can be hard for some adults, and more especially young people, to understand why they must flee fornication and how it's a sin against their own body. Because such behavior seems to be widely accepted, it can be difficult for them to understand why such behavior is wrong. This question has a particular effect on the thinking of the youth of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Many of them want to do what's right, but they can become confused when the teachings of the Church seem to be contrary to what society says is acceptable. So perhaps we can illustrate the answer to this question by using a situation that most teenagers can easily identify with. For most youth, the age of 16 is a magical number, because that's the age when they can get their own driver's license. And with that little card comes an expanded sense of freedom that allows them the chance to go wherever they want, whenever they want, without begging somebody for a ride. Yet, since most youth don't have a car of their own, they have to ask mom or dad if they can drive their car. And for this reason, most youth dream of the time when they can have their very own vehicle, where they don't have to ask anyone's permission to drive. However, until then, most parents often allow their child to use their car whenever they want. But it's clearly understood that the car belongs to the parent, not the child. And it's also understood that it's a privilege, not a right. Because if the parents discover that the child has misused their car or the driving rules, that privilege can and often is revoked. And the same principle applies between us and our Father in heaven. One of the reasons we came to earth was to gain a physical body. And it's common to hear people say, "It's my body and I can do with it what I want." However, that statement is not true. At least not yet. Before coming to earth, we had a spirit body. But once we were born into mortality, our spirit was clothed with a physical body. Now we can liken the human body to that of a piece of machinery, such as a motor vehicle, that our spirit enters and then operates. Now eventually the car will stop functioning, and when it can no longer respond to the driver's actions, the only thing the driver can do is get out of the car and walk away from it. This is what happens to our body when it dies. At that point, our spirit has no other choice but to leave its mortal body behind. We didn't come to earth on our own. Instead, our Father in heaven sent us here. And it's our Father in heaven who has allowed us to be clothed with an earthly covering. As such, our bodies don't belong to us. They belong to God, who allows us to temporarily enjoy using it. And when we die, that gift is taken away and we no longer have any access to it. Therefore, our bodies are merely on loan to us from God for a short season. Since our bodies belong to God, He has given us very explicit instructions on what kind of things we should and shouldn't do with it. And when the time comes for us to give our physical bodies back to God, we'll have to give an account for how well we took care of what God has lent us. If we followed our Father's instructions and did what we could to properly use what He lent us, then we'll be given our very own body that will be ours forever. But if we didn't take care of what God has lent us, then He will not give us the kind of body He has, which was one of the main reasons we came to earth to obtain. The Apostle Paul explained that in the resurrection there will be different kinds of bodies, based on the deeds that we did on earth. And some of those bodies will be more glorious than others. Going back to our illustration of a car, right now our corruptible bodies is kind of like driving a beat-up jalopy. But the time will come when we will trade in our corruptible body for a glorious one that will never rust or wear out. But the kind of body we'll receive in the resurrection depends on how well we follow the rules and instructions our Father gave us when He lent us our mortal bodies. To use an analogy, let's say that those who are worthy of inheriting the celestial glory will be given a Rolls-Royce or a Lamborghini to drive, while those who go to the terrestrial kingdom will be given a bicycle, while those who go to the telestial kingdom will be given a new pair of shoes for transportation. Now, of course, this is not what will actually happen, but it illustrates that there will be marked differences between these three types of resurrected bodies. When people use their bodies for the purpose of going to places of temporary fun, excitement, and pleasure, instead of using them responsibly, according to the manufacturer's instructions, someday they'll be trading in their old jalopy for a pair of shoes when they could have traded it in for a brand new Rolls-Royce. But there's another dimension to sexual purity that's even more important to the here and now. Imagine a young man who goes to a car lot and sees a shiny car. Desperate to have a car of their own, they impulsively buy a vehicle based solely on its outside appearance, without ever looking at the engine to see what kind of shape it's in and how dependable it'll be. And then, once they pay the cheap price, they proudly drive the car off the lot with a feeling of exhilaration. But in time, they discover that the car starts giving them problems, and before long, the car starts costing more and more money to keep it running, until they end up spending more money on the car than it's worth. This is exactly what happens when a young man sees a pretty young woman. She looks all shiny on the outside, and so he pays the cheap price to take her out for a night of pleasure. But in time, he keeps paying a higher and higher cost for his decision, in the form of failed relationships with women. When looking for a spouse, a person needs to pick someone who will provide a long and dependable marriage relationship. And to do this, a person has to look past how good-looking someone is and instead look inside at the heart of the person that they're interested in. If someone uses their body for temporary thrills and personal gratification, such an attitude will eventually have an effect upon their marriage. Couples can argue over finances and household chores and the raising of children, but once someone discovers that their partner has been cheating on them, the hurt they feel is so deep that it almost borders on hate. By learning to control one's sexual desires before marriage, the more likelihood there is that they'll be able to control it after marriage. To do otherwise is to risk damaging one's future, both in heaven as well as on earth, all for a temporary moment of fleeting pleasure. But such is the price paid for lack of spiritual purity.